Okay.
All right. Okay, thanks, everybody. I'd like to call to order the May meeting of the Tompkins County Industrial Development Agency for May 11th, and it's 2:30. So welcome, everybody. First item of business, or second item, is privilege of the floor. Ina or Heather, do we have any comments?
We did receive one comment.
From, was that from Todd?
Yes.
Yes. I can try to find it, but if you have it there and you want to read it, that would be great.
I'd be happy to. Was the Common Council bypassed in approving? I'm getting feedback, Ina.
It looks like it might be Rich. His box lights up when you speak. You want to mute yourself, Rich? Here you go, try again.
Okay, is that better? Was the City Common Council bypassed in approving the merging in of the ICPA school project? Why didn't the resolution that merged the two public projects acknowledge the tenants of 215 East State Street? Was a different tenant of 215 displaced by the economic development? Why wasn't a FEAF/SEQR updated when Ithaca College entered the project late in the fall of 2020? Did the city of Ithaca administratively alter this public project without Common Council approval? Uncle Toddy, Ithacan Flea Market.
Thank you. Okay. Are any other comments from the public? Okay. Why don't we go to our next item, which is additions to the agenda. Any changes or additions, Heather?
No, none.
Okay. Next item of business is the City Harbor amendments final approval. And I believe we have some guests here. Is that right?
We do. So in your packet, you have an authorizing resolution for the proposed amendments to the project that were presented at last month's meeting. Also in the packet is the public hearing notice, and I believe Ina provided via email earlier this week copies of the public hearing minutes. We do have several members of the team working on this project. Jason Crane is here, Jessica Edger, Ken Hall, David Reedman, and team.
Jody Edger's with me.
Hi, Jody.
Hi, Heather.
I guess I would just jump in at this point to mention that Todd Brewer can't be with us today. He had a work obligation, but he did send an email. He had some thoughts on this project as well as others. Another one, on this one, I don't want to speak for him, but I did want to make sure we raised the points he raised, which was he would like to see our recently enacted labor policy applied to this project. As you recall, we revised our labor policy at the end of the year. This project had already been approved, but because of it now being considered for an amendment, he is suggesting we should apply the new policy. Is that a fair summary for those who've read his email?
Yes, Rich, and I assumed that discussion at the last month's meeting, I had asked the attorneys to include that in the not the authorizing resolution, but in the amended project agreement.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure he was heard here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, wait, Heather, can you clarify? So we are including the labor policy in the project agreement?
Yes, it's my understanding that that will be included.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. So that's good information. Okay. Well, I'd like to hear from our guests. Is there anybody who'd like to address the IDA?
With respect to the labor policy?
Or the project in general? Is there anything you want to share with us? You don't have to.
Okay. So, the only thing I would say with respect to the labor policy, and I think, we talked about this the last meeting with the IDA, is that it may be virtually impossible to meet the 75% requirement simply because stuff's not available, right? Where do you go for certain materials? And so we need to drill into that more. I just want to be fully transparent. It won't be lack of effort. But it's, I guess I just want to be fully transparent. I don't want to sit here and say, well, geez, you told us you'd try and get to 75% and come back later and say, well, gee, we didn't get there. I don't think we can get there. We'll do our darn level best.
And I recognize it will be a requirement in the policy. It's a 75% requirement. There are opportunities for waivers that are laid out in the policy. And inability to find those laborers locally is one of those waiver opportunities. This will be the first project that goes through the IDA with the new labor policy. And, I would anticipate that, there may be a little bit of back and forth, based on the needs of projects. We'll just have to see as we move forward.
Understood.
But it
Yep.
will be a requirement.
Understood.
Okay, John.
Heather already said everything I was about to say, just that, we tailored the policy understanding that, and, we recognize that you're gonna meet reality and have to respond to it appropriately.
Understood.
Yeah, and I guess I'll take a turn. I understand part of your project is tapping into a heat exchange system using the Ithaca area wastewater main line. And I imagine you're going to need some very specialized services for that component. And I'm hoping that's still in your project. I think it's great.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's done. Guthrie is currently using that energy source, Rich.
Oh, that's really good news. Okay.
Yeah, it's completed.
And it's functioning.
Edger did all the work and Kimball did all the mechanical work. Kimball's out of Chemung County, so they're in one of this 5 or 7 counties. So.
Oh, even better. Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on this project? We have an authorizing resolution before us. If not, we have the authorizing resolution. Could I get somebody to move it?
Yeah, I'll move it.
John moves.
Second.
Jeff seconds. Okay, any questions or comments on the resolution? Are we ready to vote? If so, I will call the roll. Todd is excused or absent, I guess, is the Shauna.
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Faith,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. All right. Well, that's exciting. I hope that the project proceeds as easily and smoothly on all accounts as it did today. Is there any other matter we need to talk about with this project?
Just that our authorizing resolution template needs updated to include all of the members of the board. And I assume that this one's going to come to me for signature. Is that? So?
Yes, we've already modified. We did note in the resolution that went out in the packet, we left off Jeff Gorski. Not intentionally.
No, I have a modified copy here that has his name on it, so he's included. So, good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Very much.
All right. The next
Thank
item
you.
is the BVSHF3 project CHDF payment. And for any visitors we have, this is the project at the base of State Street. And what's under discussion is the payment to the Community Housing Development Fund. Let's see, do we want to do any introduction to this, or are we all, we know where we're going to argue with each other about? John, why don't you go first?
Yeah. So I think, I provided extensive comments to the entire board in writing earlier today. And what I'd like to do actually is present a motion that we would offer the developer the opportunity to defer the Housing Development Fund payment according to our not yet adopted policy that will be in front of us later today. So they would pay a 20% fee in the immediately, and then essentially 1/3 of the payment in each of the first 3 operating years. And I so move.
Okay, do we get a second for that? Shauna seconds. All right. Discussion? I had a question for Russ. Are we allowed to do this? I thought there might be some issue with adding an additional payment. Or if we
Yeah.
do it as an option, can we get away with it?
Yeah. John and I spoke, and Heather and I have chatted regularly about this. And my suggestion would be that if you're going to add something to the policy after it's been adopted, that it could raise an issue. In other words, if you're going to basically, John, correct me if I'm wrong, charge a 20% payment penalty because it's not being paid at closing. If I was the developer and I represent the board, not the developer, I would question it.
Sure, but I mean, I think that at this point, there's some they're in sort of questionable territory already, I guess I'll say. Having committed to the board on multiple occasions that they would pay the fee at closing, and having no resolution from the board accepting anything else. I think that, and also understanding that if it comes to it, they have to pay our legal fees regardless. This will be a small a small matter, I expect, with regard to the alternatives, and I think that it's a fair way to resolve the errors that were made.
What is the Heather? Do you know off the top of your head what the math is? Frankly,
I did that math in my email earlier. It was they'd be paying $321,000 immediately, and then $535,000 in each of the first 3 years of operating.
Well, again, it's not within the 4 corners of the policy, and John is correct that the policy states that the housing fee is due and payable at closing. Past practice has allowed for developers to pay it over time, and that's what we did here. And so if it's at the board's pleasure to ask for an additional 20%, you certainly can do that. Whether or not there will be amenable to that, I don't know.
I will raise the point that in the past, in the 2 instances that we've done this, both of those actions were appropriately approved by the board. They were discussed prior to agreeing to the pilot, and were authorized by the board. Whereas in this case, the board made no such authorization to deviate from our policy.
Okay, anybody else want to be heard at this point? If not, I'll take a turn. I wrote an email in response to an email from Todd. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to see that, and I don't want to just repeat myself, but I think we're dealing with some competing important values. One is, we should live by the rules we make, and we know the history that the IDA made a representation at the closing to allow phased payments, and the closing occurred on that basis. So there was reliance on our representation, at least to some extent. And for me, that's a concern, that we induce some activity as a result of our representation. Whether that was the right thing to do or not is a separate matter, and we've talked about that internally. I would like to know that we stood by whatever commitment we made. And I think there's a fairness element in trying to change the terms after the financing was already secured. And I understand everything John wrote in his email about lawyers should have caught this. They didn't. Being a lawyer, I can tell you lawyers sometimes make mistakes. Other lawyers, of course, but I've made my share as well. And that appears that nobody here understood, or nobody at the closing understood, that there was a different written rule in our policies than the representation that was given to the developer. I also want to make sure that doesn't send a message to other developers that we would change rules after we've made commitments and set a precedent that way. Obviously, anything we do sets a precedent, but that is of concern to me. I also want to make sure that the project goes forward. You know, as John indicated, we are in desperate need of housing. We want the money to be paid into the housing fund, and there would be a benefit to getting it up front, but it would get there eventually with phased payments. And we also have need for the housing that's getting built. It does seem like everything at this end of the spectrum that is getting built is getting rented. So I'll stop there. And I see, Shauna, you have your hand up. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I think that John's amendment is actually a really nice middle ground. You know, I understand that mistakes were made, you know, first by Heather and then by the attorney for not catching this. I think it goes back to, however, you know, whenever you go into a bank and you buy either a car or a house, at any point, the bank is able to say that we made a mistake and go back after the fees. You know, that the decision was absolutely the role of the board to make. And the developer had actually been asked before if, in fact, they had to pay the amount up front. This is not going to tank the project. It appears, and whenever Heather asked before, the project is still going to move forward. You know, I think what you have to consider with this board, as well as any other board that we're on, is every year this board is going to have different members that are going to have different priorities. And as of, you know, February, whenever I started, I have different priorities than the person before me. And you are going to see some inconsistency due to that. So while I don't think that we should allow them 3 years to pay, I think the upfront investment in the housing fund is what is needed here.
All right. Is there anybody else who wishes to be heard? All right. Are we ready to vote?
I do have my hand up.
John, go ahead.
Sorry.
I thought you had just left it up. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to address a couple of the specific points that you made. And, you know, I'll try to be relatively brief, but there was a lot in there. I really take pretty substantial umbrage to this concept of like fairness, and that like the developers relying on this representation that happened in the contract, and that being sort of the highest standard of like, you know, where we want to set our precedent or ethics here. In my mind, like we as a board considered this project with a representation from the developer throughout. And this was something that was talked about from the very beginning when it came before us. It was something that, you know, throughout a number of meetings, we heard that this payment was going to be made at closing. When we voted to approve the pilot in the first place, it was subject to that condition. And, you know, I feel like we have an expectation that we should be able to rely upon the things that are presented to us in the application materials, and the statements that are made of material facts as they're presented to this board by the developers. And I think that if I were before this board with a project, which, you know, someday maybe I'll play in the big league, then, you know, I would expect to come back if there was that kind of substantial change, and to, you know, make sure that I was transparent with the board as to why it was being made, and that, you know, the board has the ultimate authority to make that decision. It really does not feel like it's a really the same kind of fairness issue as you're representing it, although I can understand why you might have that perspective. And I also think that there's, you know, when we talk about the precedents we want to set the precedent that, you know, that our policies are fungible sort of at the 11th hour, you know, without the scrutiny of the board, feels pretty profound to me. And I think that it's something that we have to think about when we're casting our votes here. And I also, you know, and I heard you say that, you know, well, we'll get the funds eventually in the Housing Development Fund. And it's like the way that projects tend to go. I mean, this project is already, they told us if they weren't in the ground in October, they'd have to delay another year, right? And it's, well, October has come and gone. They're not in the ground. So, now instead of a 2024 open, we're probably looking at 2025. Every project always slips. I mean, my own project slip. I don't say that as any kind of, disrespect to the developer. You set a schedule, you try real hard to meet it. But it almost, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. I fully expect that there will be further delays. And so, now we're talking about the difference between payments received in 2022, which will be in the 2023 NOFA for the Housing Development Fund, which can support projects that could be in the ground around 2024, or we're talking about payments that are coming in, maybe 2025, maybe 2026, which are supporting projects that could not start until 2027, 2028. And that's a pretty significant impact for people who in our community that are struggling to find affordable housing right now, that are unable to find a place to live. And to say, well, we'll get it eventually. I don't think that it's really the same. I think that that's something that's very important that we should be considering in our voting. So,
Okay. Thanks, John. Okay, Mike.
I just, I have a competing resolution that's on page 9, which I'm having trouble finding actually on my phone now, because that's where I'm trying to look it up. But if you look at page 9 in your packet, it should be right there. So do we have to vote on the one first and then we vote on the competing resolution? How do you want to work that, Rich?
Well, John has put his on the floor, so it's before us. So I think we have to address his proposal first.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please.
If the board wants to reconsider the timing of the payments or the amount of the payments, my suggestion would be to rescind prior resolutions if that's at the board's pleasure, and then reintroduce what is being proposed.
Which, John's or Mike's?
I don't know. I think you start with one and go to the next.
Russ, when you say rescind prior resolutions, I don't think any resolution on this matter has passed. They've all failed.
Yeah, John, it passed. I mean, the final approvals are in hand, and what is in the four corners of the documents is a payment over time. And if the board is wanting to add a 20% addition to the housing fund payment, that's something the board needs to consider, and the timing of those payments.
But the resolution with the timing of payments was not voted on by this board, right?
You mean the phasing of payments?
Yeah. The phasing of payments. Again, John, you and I talked about this. I don't recall if it was actually approved by the board, the phasing of payments.
Okay, Heather, do you have some help here for us?
Yes. So going back to the Housing Committee, which John Guttridge sat on at the time that the policy was implemented, there was much discussion about the timing. And there was, I think, unanimous agreement at the committee level that the preference would be that the payment be made up front. And so that's what the policy should say. And then there was this whole discussion about, well, if the developer is unable or has pushback, or if there's some financial reason where they would prefer, rather than using their equity or taking out additional construction financing to pay the payment up front, that we allow them to pay it out of operating cash flow over the first 3 years of operation. Our preference is up front, but we should allow them, let's put it in the policy that they have to pay it up front. And my recollection is that was pretty unanimous agreement. The first two projects that came in, I said, here's the policy, it goes up front. And they both said, well, the numbers are thin and I can't I'm not willing to take out additional financing or put additional equity into this project to jeopardize my return on investment. So can I pay it at another time? And I said, well, you can pay it over the 3 years. I always try and err on the side of putting more information in the benefit memo than less information for both of those projects. It was pretty straightforward. I identified that they would be paying over the 3 years. There was no discussion, there was no resolution. However, it was reported to the board. And, I relied on that practice with the McKinley project. However, the timing on McKinley was a little bit different because, yes, you are right, John. All along, they said to me, they said to the board, we're going to be able to pay up front. Over the last 3 months before closing, there was a lot of activity. The planning board reduced the unit, they weren't able to get a variance. They reduced the units. The construction costs went up. The financing costs went up. It was just a sort of a negative storm. And I did fail to notify the board. I'm apologetic of that. I know we've had conversations about fee structure and fees in the past. I've talked to a number of my IDA counterparts, and they view it as administrative when fees are paid. A good number of my counterparts set fees. The boards give them that authority. And I recognize that we've had that fee discussion, and this board does not want me to have that authority, and I'm fine with that. I made a mistake. However, when the developer called me and said, all this stuff has happened and my financing's in jeopardy and my term sheets aren't coming back the way I thought they were going to, my equity is rocketed to $47 million because the bank will only do 65% loan to value. Can I pay this fee like the other projects did over the 3 years? And I said, yeah, I don't see where that could be a problem. So I misrepresented. I think it goes a little bit further than just the documents having a material mistake. I misrepresented. And, in good faith, these developers are actually looking at our community. 10 years ago, local developers were hard pressed to develop here. And now we actually have local developers, regional developers, and out-of-state developers that are willing to look at our market. I think it goes a long way to providing support for much needed housing development in our community. If this developer, I know he's looking at other projects in the community, maybe, there's a bad taste in his mouth and there aren't other projects that he's going to look at. I wanted to add that in there.
Okay. I see two hands. I see Mike and John. Mike, did you have? Not right now. Okay. John, did you have more?
Yeah, there are a couple of things I have to push back on that, Heather. We did have robust discussion of both of the previous two projects and the timing of the payments at the board, and they were approved by the board in those meetings. I remember going back and forth quite a bit with Martha Robertson about the timing of the payments for the Arnott project, and pushing for those to be a little bit more aggressive as well. Yes, I certainly think that it's the case that we can deviate from our policy when a project needs it. I think that we need to be, that needs to be something that comes before the board. We have rules, we have policies for a reason. The latitude that's provided by our policy is to allow for administrative action without coming to the board when it's clear that it's within the scope of our policies, and anything else really has to come back before us. I also, of course, every developer will tell us, oh, my numbers are too tight. I don't know if I can develop in this community, blah, 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 blah. This developer has been rejected for a tax abatement in the past, and a project fell apart on State Street, which incidentally, someone else then went and built. It's a great project. It's open today, that city center. Here they are coming again. Our market is incredibly attractive. I don't think we have to compromise ourselves to attract development. I think that the realities of the housing market that we have here will continue to attract development activity from all over the United States. And honestly, I think that we need to recognize that these developers are lucky to have access to a market that's good with incentives as generous as we provide.
I will just add that project never came to the IDA. It didn't even get that far. the other project that you referred to. And this developer's return on investment, cash on cash, is 2.3% in year one. It increases to just under 6.5–7% in year 10. His internal rate of return is less than 5%. Whether he has deep pockets or not, every project has to stand on its own. Nobody's going to invest in a project in any community if there isn't some financial return for them. This developer has put up $47 million in private equity. They will not see that equity return to them for over 25 years.
I mean, unless they sell the project for
Unless
substantially
they
more than
sell it.
construction, which City Center just did, Todd Fox's project in Collegetown just did. I think the dynamics of private equity-based investing in the United States right now are such that actually we're seeing a level of investment activity on projects that actually don't return, that even produce negative returns. Private equity has too much money and is having a hard time deploying it fast enough. And, I think that that's changing the dynamics of the game right now. And I think we should be careful not to apply an older understanding of how these investments are made and to give up too much.
John, I take your point. I guess I wouldn't say that it's appropriate for us to say, well, it's going to be fine if they sell their investment, because maybe they don't want to sell. They want it to they want the math to work. But anyway,
it still very much does. I mean, this is a small fraction
here.
of their contingency. I mean, it's like, orders of magnitude smaller than the value of the project. This isn't going to change anything.
Again, my concern largely stems from, I feel like we need to keep our commitment that we made, but we tend to, I think we're going in circles. And I also think it falls to me to make a determination which motion we consider. And I would suggest that we vote on John's motion because it's been on the floor and has been debated. Are there any other comments or questions on the presentation by John? And John, I assume your motion would provide this in the alternative to the developer.
Correct.
Okay. Anything further? Are we ready to vote? Todd is absent. Shauna?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Faith?
No.
Mike?
No.
Jeff?
No.
And the chair votes no. I think we can then proceed to Mike's motion. Do you wish to make that? That's the motion on page 9 you were saying of the packet?
That's my understanding. Yeah. Like I said, I'm having trouble pulling that up right now, but yeah, page 9.
Well, Heather, why don't you present that?
That'd be great. Thanks.
You're on mute, Heather.
Thank you. A motion regarding the timing of the BVHSF3 Ithaca LLC project payment of $1,605,000 to the Community Housing Development Fund as a fee as follows: $200,000 towards the housing fee amount at the beginning of construction and the remainder of the fee in 3 equal installments commencing 12 months after the first business day in the month in which the construction, renovation, and equipping of the project is complete.
Yeah, and this is Russ, sorry. And if this is obviously being presented to the board, this will have to be properly documented, which assuming the board authorizes or considers, we will do that, of course.
So you're saying you'll prepare a formal resolution from this? Okay.
Correct.
Mike, is that your motion?
And then Rich, implement that within the documents.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah, Mike, that is your motion, to be clear.
Yes, that is.
And is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Jeff, thank you. Questions, comments, discussion? Are we all angry at each other? I think we've arrived. Are we ready to vote then and get this behind us? Okay, I will call the roll.
You know what, Rich? I actually have a question about process because I mean, this is the 3rd time we're going to vote on McKinley. And I guess my question is, if and when we vote on this, if it passes, what stops us from bringing this up next week or the next meeting, if and when Todd is here, and we know what his thoughts are on this?
I suppose it depends how the vote turns out. If there's a majority on one side or the other, a clear majority of the whole board, it's unlikely to come up again. I guess anybody could continue to raise the issue into the future. Any board can do this. I'm not sure we would benefit from revisiting it again and again, but I don't know that.
I feel like we already have been. That's the problem, is that it's been so confusing. We say our meetings run as if we're abiding by Robert's rules. And, we voted on this. This will be the third time now. And it seems like it's very intentional. And the reason why is because a handful of people on this board didn't like the votes of the first two times that it went around. And, I just question at what point, every single meeting we have in the future, there might not be one person on either side of this debate. And, I'm puzzled.
Donna, I take your point. I think the difficulty here is that there appeared to be a clear majority that would be in favor of the motion that's on the floor right now. Maybe not today, but that's been the impression, that has not been able to vote on this. And the idea of stating the will of the IDA in a majority form has not occurred. And that I think is what we're heading towards. Perhaps, maybe somebody will change their position. But
In order for a majority to exist now, somebody would have to change their position. Right now, the only person who hasn't voted on this is Jeff, who abstained the last time we considered it. Mike and Faith both voted no. I think it's clear that Shauna and I will both vote no. And you voted in favor, or maybe you weren't here. I'd have to go back.
So actually, John, I did vote on this one. I didn't need to abstain for this one.
Well, right. The first time we voted on it, you were still abstaining. I went back and looked at the minutes.
Yeah, I would say the first time, yes.
Right. So, I
right,
mean,
Mike?
I'm ready just to vote. It's fine.
Okay.
I was just going to say, it seems like clearly a mistake was made, and it seems like we're belaboring that mistake, and we're making that sound like that's the policy of whatever we do going forward. And I just don't see it that way. I see it as a mistake, and we're going to correct that mistake right now. And it doesn't seem like, I don't understand why we continue to beat that mistake into the ground. But whatever, I mean, that's fine. So yeah, I'm ready to move forward whenever you are, Rich.
Okay. Is there anybody else who wishes to be heard? I will call the roll. Todd is absent. Shauna?
No.
In Chambers, and I have an unstable connection, so we'll see.
Oh, okay. John?
no.
Faith?
No.
You're voting against?
Oh. Okay, hang on a minute. I do have a question. I can't find Mike's. I can't find Mike's at all. I don't know where it is. And I had read John's. I'm just confused as to, and I'm sorry that I'm confused. I kind of messed this up last time, so I just want to make sure that I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm new to the board this year, and I just want to make sure that I thought I had Mike's, but I cannot find it in any of the
Rich, I'm happy to reread the resolution if you would
I'm
like.
sorry.
If you look at page 9 of your packet, there's a memo from Russ.
It's from Heather.
Oh, it's from Heather. Okay, maybe that's where I was.
And the language of the resolution is contained in that memo.
Okay.
And it's authorizing the developer to pay $200,000 up front and then the remainder in 3 payments once construction.
So is this the original? This is not the original. This is a version of, I'm sorry, you guys, I really am.
I would actually move that we table this so that Todd could be here for the next meeting. Faith can have time to look at the proposal. No one should be rushed into voting for this.
What's the
I'll
will of
second
the
that.
IDA? Is there a second for the motion to table?
Yeah, I'll
John
second it.
seconds. Okay. So a motion to table is before us. Anybody who wish to speak to the motion? Faith, would you like more
If we
time?
table it, what happens? Is that will it wait too long? Is there some kind of timeline that we're under? I guess that's my concern. I mean, it's been this long. I guess it's, I don't want to hold it up any further if that's.
Heather,
Although it will provide us with the opportunity to actually hear from the entire board at once, which I think, if we want to put this issue to bed, to be completely honest, that's probably the best path, because here we are with yet another different set of not quite everybody.
Heather, is there an issue if we push this off for one more month and got the joy of considering this again?
The developer is not willing to sign construction term sheets or financing term sheets until he knows what is going to be the resolution here. If the board wants to wait another month, he will wait. He will have to wait another month.
His critical time for an August open is October, so,
What's the will of the legislature? Let's vote on the motion to table. Shauna,
Yes.
John,
yes.
Faith,
Yes.
Mike,
I'm sorry. Can you come back to me at the end? Sorry.
oh, well, this is the order. This is the motion to table.
Oh, okay. Yes. If Faith wants it, yeah, that's fine. Yes.
Okay, Jeff?
No.
Okay, and it does appear the votes are there. The chair is going to vote yes. Let's take another month. We're going to delay the developer, but let's make sure we get everybody here at the next meeting, and we'll take the vote and make sure everybody understands what they're voting on. I think there's some benefit to that. So, okay. Next up on our agenda is the TCIDA housing policy recommendations from committee and approval that are shown on page 10 of the agenda. We just love this housing policy. Heather, do you want to introduce this?
I will. So the housing policy was originally adopted in July of 2020, and it was agreed upon that it would be reviewed at least annually. And so in 2021, around summertime, the committee did get together and started to review the policy. We had a couple of meetings throughout the fall to make some recommended modifications. And John is now the chair of the committee. You presided over the last meeting when we sort of penned or approved these final recommended changes. Did you want to speak to any of these?
Yeah, so this is actually the result of a couple of meetings, right? Because we're also including the short-term housing. There was some interest from the board in our consideration of whether or not we would support a project that was specifically residential in nature, but allowed short-term rentals, sort of the Airbnb thing, but apartments. Clearly we'll support hotels as a commercial endeavor. So that is now a feature of this policy. And then in addition, we're providing some clarity around the specific issue that has us tied up in knots right now, around what happens when the payment is deferred. A lot went into this. What we came down to was, essentially something that is administratively simple, that Heather can just do without doing a ton of math or working too hard on a spreadsheet, and is roughly equivalent to if a 6% interest rate, which at this time is now a very favorable interest rate, were applied to financing the fee over those first 3 years. This would roughly equal the same amount of cost to the developer as financing that using 6%. And I think that's pretty much what we got here.
So in summary, the change to the housing policy is proposing essentially what you were moving to do with city or with BVSHF. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, I mean, that was ultimately the basis of my motion. Is like, we've considered this as a housing policy. We spent a bunch of time on it. I think we came up with a good result. It will now hopefully become our policy in this meeting. I mean, actually, I'll go ahead and move it. We think this is a good way to handle this.
Okay, so you've moved that. Do we get a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Jeff. And Jeff, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, hey, so John, quick question just on the language. So what if a developer is willing to pay, say, half of it up front? So let's just say it's $1 million fee and he says, hey, I can pay $500,000. Is that 20% still on the original million, or would it now be on the 500,000 that's still outstanding? That was my first kind of, when I was looking at the language, I'm like, because I'm assuming we do have developers that'll pay a portion up front. So do we penalize them for the full amount, or should it be just on the portion that they aren't paying?
I personally tried to make this a spreadsheet that Heather could just enter the parameters to make it go. But it was suggested that was going to be too complicated to even determine if we were following the policy, which I have a lot of respect for that position. I don't want to overload staff. I think ultimately, if such a developer were to walk through the door, there is nothing that prevents them, as Russ will remind us over and over again, from presenting such a solution to the board and saying, hey, look, how about I pay half up front and then I only get dinged on the 20% on the other half. And it seems likely that this board or some future board would accept that. It would have to come before us as a board, but we should see these projects in a state where they can make those suggestions. Unless you have a really eloquent way of writing into this language that it's flexible, I think the answer is so are all our policies, and it just has to come before the board.
That's fine. I just wanted to make sure that that we at least had thought about that, considered it. And I'm fine at leaving at the board discretion. If a developer comes and says, hey, I'll pay half up front, I would be comfortable then saying, hey, okay, we'll only assess the fee on the 20% that's outstanding.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I can't see some board being like, no, that's not good for us. It's like, yeah, we want the money sooner. That's why we do this.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? I guess I'd have a comment. Thanks for all the work on this. I know I attended one of the meetings. There was a lot of discussion, good discussion, and from the non-IDA members that participated as well. So if we're ready to vote, I'll call the roll. Shauna?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Faith?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Okay.
Can I just throw something out here on our previous topic at the risk of driving everybody nuts? Heather, would you be willing to go to Jeff Giffens and ask him if he would do this to put this whole issue to bed? I can't see a downside to us of accepting this from him if several of us are considering accepting less. Just throw it out there. You would probably get unanimous support if he was willing and felt good about that.
I could certainly ask. My conversations to date in trying to come up with a compromise with the $200,000 upfront was not, he had to actually consider, whether that would be amenable given the closing documents. My assumption is that, he's a developer, he's going to say no.
I mean, it's 120 grand different right now, and maybe I'll say yes. It'll put the whole thing to bed and he get his project started.
Well, the 200,000 is part of the payment, right? That's not a premium.
Sure.
That's correct.
Yeah. Anyway, no harm in asking, I guess. Okay. Moving on. The next item is the chair's report. I do not have a chair's report today. We'd move on to staff report. And on page 12 of your packet is the financial report. But Heather, if there's other things you want to talk about, why don't we move through them?
I do have a couple of updates. I didn't get to report last month when this body approved the Paris reports that had all been submitted. But, kudos to this board. Last year, we had 58 active projects that paid $3.3 million in new property tax. They created or retained over 2,117 jobs. That's new jobs and retained jobs. And that was just a snapshot for 2021. So lots of projects. We've seen over the past several years an increase in number of projects, particularly downtown. But I just wanted everyone to, hey, pat yourself on the back a little bit for the work that has happened at this board to really increase property tax and help to support not only jobs, but lots of other non-quantifiable community benefits, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and housing at every type and size that this community has a desperate need for, as has been documented in several housing needs assessments. So, pretty good work in terms of the projects that have been approved last year.
Okay, I thought my tablet, I was putting the AC in.
Oh, yeah.
In addition, I hope that everyone got the invitation that I sent for the ribbon cutting at the Art House project, which is the Vecino Group's first project in Ithaca down on Cherry Street. That is tomorrow at noon. Rich John will be making a couple of comments on behalf of the IDA. So if you wanted to show up, you're welcome to do that. I did have a conversation with the town and Village of Dryden's Housing Committee. They had asked me to attend a meeting of theirs to talk a little bit about how the IDA has been delivering incentives in the downtown density district in the city of Ithaca, with a real desire to look at ways that they might be able to support more multifamily mixed-use development in some of the nodal areas in the town of Dryden. I'm going to follow up and provide them with a couple of scenarios of projects. I always say that the IDA is a great tool. It's a great tool when you have some scale to a project and you can actually phase in new property taxes. For a really small project, it doesn't work very well. And that's some of I think some of the issues with looking at doing projects outside of that downtown density area. But it was really just an introductory discussion and I think an invitation to have a little bit more conversation with the IDA potentially at some point. I wanted to update on Arrowhead. We've had meetings that went way over time for a couple of months, and so I thought I would just provide a little bit of an update. The Village of Lansing has provided them with some extensions in terms of completing the first 12 units, and then they have until July to complete or to start construction on, I think there's 2 or 3 additional duplexes. So the project is moving forward. It is still limping along. The developer has determined that he would put one master water meter in rather than subdividing. I think that was part of the issue there. And so that's moving forward, albeit we don't know at what pace. And after the Paris reports are submitted, we go through and do what we call a job report, where we take all the projects that had any job creation requirements and we look at how they're doing in terms of creating those jobs that they pledged that they said they were going to. And for any of those that are not meeting those job creation requirements, I'll go out and have meetings and discussions with those. So that has started to take place and I'm starting to work through that process a little bit. So you should be seeing a memo and some recommendations from me, if not in next month, the following month. And that's it for my report, unless anyone has questions.
Can I propose a brief executive session to discuss pending litigation?
Yes, you can do that. That's at the board's discretion.
So I'll move to go into executive session to discuss pending litigation. And oh wait, we have a TCDC meeting. Do we want to finish that and then do it at the end of that? I'm sorry, Rich, you're on mute.
Rich, you're on mute.
Rich, you're on mute.
Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, I would, what you suggest, let's get our business done.
Yeah.
So that anybody watching on YouTube can drop off and they won't
Great.
have to guess if the meeting continued and further action was taken.
Sounds
But,
good.
so just re-raise that at the end of our meeting for the Development Corporation.
Yeah, will do.
Okay. Any questions for Heather? Anything on the finance report that you wanted to share with us, Heather?
It's in your packet. Quarterly, we provide the financial report. We do have a bit of a fund balance, and I will be reporting out. I think Rich and I discussed it, and I am going to come up with a plan for fund balance and review that with the Finance Committee.
Okay. If we move on the agenda, there's committee minutes from the Housing Committee. Those are informational, but we do have minutes from our April 20th, 22 board meeting. And if I could get a motion to approve those minutes. Mike moves, Shauna seconds. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Shauna?
Yes.
John? John?
Sorry, mute. Yes.
Faith?
Yes.
Mike? You're muted.
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. And I believe that completes the agenda for the IDA. And I just ask for a call to adjourn. If you can all just raise your hands. Right. The Industrial Development Committee meeting is adjourned. However, we will potentially reconvene for purposes of an executive session. And I'd like to call to order the Tompkins County Development Corporation meeting of May 11th, 2022. First item of business is, or second item is any privilege of the floor. Has anybody wished to address the Development Corporation? Right?
No.
Any additions to the agenda?
No.
Right. And we have some business, which is review of our Paris documents. This is informational, so it looks like we don't need to vote on it. But Heather, do you want to give us a report on our Paris submissions?
They're provided for your information in the packet. Everything was submitted by that March 31 deadline, and we did not have an April meeting of the Development Corporation, so we're just presenting them now.
I would say, Ina, thank you for all your work on this. I know that there's distinct challenges in filling out all the Paris information and getting it done on time, and chasing down everybody where you need to gather the information from. So that's great. Any questions or comments on the Paris report? All right, very good. I believe the next item of business is our chair's report. I do not have a report. We do have some financial information in the staff report. Is there anything else, Heather, that you want to report on for the Development Corporation?
Nope, no activity, no business to report.
All right. Are there any questions or comments on our financial report for the Development Corporation? Seeing none, I'd ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the March 9th, 2022 meeting of the Development Corporation.
So moved.
John moves, Shauna seconds. Any questions or comments on those minutes? I'll call the roll. Shauna?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Faith?
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Jeff,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. And I believe the only other item is adjournment. Could I get our show of hands to adjourn? All right. We stand adjourned, and let's reconvene the IDA for purposes of considering a motion to go into executive session. John, did you want to move that?
Yeah, I'll move to enter executive session to discuss pending litigation.
And is there a second? Shauna seconds. Okay, all those in favor of going into executive session? Let's do it by show of hands. Unanimous? Great. Let's take a moment and we'll turn off the recording. And I will state for the record, we do not plan to take any action after coming out of executive session.